question for you to ponder this morning, dear viewer. Are there tough races or are there structural injustices at the heart of America's electoral system? According to our next guest, Irami Osei-Frimpong, structural injustice reigns supreme.
So, doctoral student at the University of Georgia, Irami Osei-Frimpong, a.k.a. the Funky Academic, joins us now to discuss in the context of what is going on with Amazon and that union election. Irami, lay it on us. We got 10 minutes. Just letting you know at the top.
Sounds good. All right, so I suspect we're going to hear a lot about sham elections in the next decade. It's going to be the thing, right? Whether we're talking about Stop the Steal folks breaking into the Capitol building or depending on who you talk to, racialized voter suppression in the South. People are going to say sham elections are the thing that's going on, right? And most of these charges are going to be launched by people who don't like the results. And I would admit that all of this would be a lot easier if these charges were launched by people who actually won the elections, but very few of them have the quality of character that would incline them to invalidate a process that had anointed them as winners. And that's a whole problem in itself in terms of integrity of our elected officials. But we have to understand that elections themselves aren't magic. You can't just throw an election in to cleanse a swamp of corrupt institutions, but rather elections within corrupt institutional conditions simply turn into corrupt elections. Right? Meaningful elections occur within an institutional ecosystem that supports free and fair elections. So we have to actually get clear about what the content of these institutional conditions that enable free and fair elections. Right? So there's a prof by the name of Jason Stanley over at Yale who wrote a nice little book called How Propaganda Works. And he says, look, in authoritarian regimes, you have a minister of truth who controls the media, who decides what's on TV, who decides what's in the newspapers. In liberal regimes, you have the same level of control. It's just the mechanisms are different. You control people's thoughts and actions by omission. So when I talk about this with students, I talk about how high school students are force-fed to read Walden by Thoreau and talk about the freedom and the joy of nature. But then teachers leave out how Thoreau had his mom do his laundry, and then how Thoreau, like every other week, his mom would do his laundry, and how Thoreau went home for meals during the weekends. So it is through omission that teachers distort the student's conception of nature and how it will or will not support you. It turns out nature will leave you starved and stinking, but if you leave out the omissions of all the work that went into Thoreau's Idyll, you'll leave the poem thinking that, or the book thinking that nature will leave you kind of refreshed.
It looks beautiful and idyllic. So Irami, give us some of the metrics for what a legitimate election would ultimately look like.
Right. So the conditions of free and fair elections are frustrated by the relevant pieces of information and the dubious communications infrastructure. We have a hard time getting checks to people. And we need to build a banking infrastructure to democratize money and make sure everybody gets their stimulus checks. You better believe we have a hard time getting the right quality of information to people and political communications to people so that they can actually democratize power and make informed judgments in our elections, right? So we talk about the nation's physical infrastructure needs, crumbling airports and roads, but the bigger threat to our democracy is the casual regard we have for political communication infrastructure. Remember, nobody knew who Howard Ingram was, and that's the problem, right? Now, absent that infrastructure, elections just become a decadent ceremony through which a faction of the elite party leadership use the electorate to legitimize the realization of their factional interests over and above the electorate. So we have this rhetoric of a tough race. So the person running against Nikema Williams here in Atlanta or in Georgia is running a tough race. Nikema Williams anointed herself as John Lewis's heir because she was the chair of the Democratic Party and she could do that. And now she's in pretty much an impossible race to get her out. You would need an entire team and a crane to get her out. Right? So the person running against Pelosi is in a tough race. But really, the voters in these districts are laboring under political repression. A tough race would be a race against a popular politician who puts forth a compelling vision of governments, like in public, that is duly debated in public, right? But in these districts, we're talking about party functionaries weaponizing monopoly control over the political apparatus over and above the electorate, right? So we have like an antitrust issue, not a tough race. We have political repression. Right? Even Raphael Warnock's primary in Georgia, there wasn't anything close to a culture of like contested debate. Stacey Abrams picked Warnock. For a while, I wasn't really sure I could see Warnock's mouth move without Stacey Abrams' mouth also moving. and that was settled. There were 20 other candidates in the race. The media maybe covered 3 of them, but Warnock was allowed to get so far without saying much outside of anything that besides like healthcare is good. Mm-hmm. He was picked. And there wasn't any infrastructure for action to challenge him. And he didn't sit for like a culture of public debates. It should have been like 20 of them. We had 20 candidates. Right? I think the model should be the 2016 GOP primary. There should be that many debates. And you say debates don't matter, but like we could be talking about President Bloomberg without a debate. We don't know. Like you don't.
It's an excellent.
That's really true.
I think it's an excellent point, Irami. We're running out of time, unfortunately, so we appreciate you joining us, man. But you have given us quite a lot to think about here.
Everybody go sub the Funky Academic over on YouTube.
It makes you think.
Great to see you, Irami.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll have more rising for you after this.